Hi all, I've got the AW3225QF here, the 32-inch Alienware 240Hz 4K QD OLED. This is the Gen 3, and I also own the AW3423DW. I actually had 5 of those. 2 are replaced for Burnin, 2 are replaced for defects. So I have had full-on experience of Dell's 3-year next-day warranty replacements. I've not had any refurbs being sent as replacements. They've all been brand new sealed boxes, so that's been really good to experience. So, which is one of the reasons why I bought this instead of, say, the MSI or Asus ones, even though they have a bit more in the way of features. So this doesn't have as many features as those models do, but the after-sales service from Dell or Alienware has always been really excellent. So I'd rather, that's my compromise basically, I'd rather have that peace of mind knowing that if something goes wrong, there'll be a next day replacement, no questions asked. So there are a few differences between this, the Gen 3 and the Gen 1 of the AW3423DW and DWF. The firmware on this is 105, so it doesn't ship with the newest firmware, so you do need to download the updated firmware for it. And in terms of menus and things, so if I just go over the menus first, there are some notable differences compared to the previous Gen 1s. The menu itself, you can hold the jog dial in whatever direction and it cycles through much quicker than before. So the menu's processing speed is much quicker, which is nice to see. The creator mode is what I use 24/7 even in gaming. So it's creator mode, gamma is set to the default 2.2, and color space is RGB, sRGB, and I'll show you why in a minute. You can use standard. Standard is fairly accurate as well, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. But because I do editing, a lot of productivity work, and I view a lot of content which is color critical as well, so I prefer to be the most accurate. And these things, the 32 inches from Dell, are insanely accurate out of the box, to the point you don't even need to use a colorimeter to calibrate it. It's just excellent. But if you're doing HDR stuff, playing HDR games or watching HDR media, then you do need to run the Windows HDR calibration tool and create that profile. So what that looks like is, once you've done the profiling, you'll go into Windows display settings and it creates a HDR only profile. So this profile is only used when HDR content is being displayed, and that will just tell the monitor what the OS Windows what the monitor is capable of. So 1000 nits, for example, or 400 depending on what HDR mode you're on. So that's all that's for. So it just tells the OS what to display basically. So it's important to do that first. And once you've done that, if I show text legibility as well. So this is Gen 3, so it does have a new updated subpixel layout that improves text out of the box, but it's still not perfect out of the box. There is some fringing still, so you still need to use tools like this, better Cleartype tuner, and I'll put a link to this in the description below. And what you need to do is set it to RGB, should be there at default, and the contrast is 2200. So if I just set 2200 and then click set. Now watch what happens to the display text there as soon as I click set. It's just changed, so any of that green fringing that was there is now gone. And this applies to the Gen 1 QD-OLED, Gen 2 QD-OLED, and now Gen 3 as well. So even though the subpixel layout is updated, it still benefits from using better Cleartype tuner on Windows. Don't know if the same on Mac. Mac probably has its own text rendering. But yeah, use this, run it as administrator, and you're good to go. So there's another thing to note as well. These now support Dolby Vision. So I do have Dolby Vision enabled just so I can show you, but I don't enable it. So I've got it on at the moment and set to dark. That's the most accurate Dolby Vision for this. The issue that you will see is when you're viewing HDR content, whether it's Dolby Vision or not, for some reason the QF seems to think you're displaying Dolby Vision when you're not. So even if it's HDR, normal HDR, not Dolby Vision HDR, it will flick up on the corner there saying Dolby Vision, even though it's not. And that happens throughout your playback. So I've got to test movie here at the moment, which I'll just play. And you can see there, Dolby Vision in the corner. And the screen flickers, so it flickers to black and then back again in a split moment. And that seems to happen quite regularly. So there you go. So if I skip back and forth, watch what happens. And it will flick to black again in a moment.
Out of this guy's face, here's the #1 single in the country right now. Write our new song.
Yeah, so it did that flick to black and then back again. So that's kind of weird that it does that. And it did it again there when I flicked back out of it. So that's why I don't recommend using Dolby Vision. And I've also found, so I'll test this quickly, highlight areas, for example there, you lose some detail, it becomes overexposed when Dolby Vision is enabled. So if I turn Dolby Vision off and reload, so let's just go to the menu, turn Dolby Vision off. I do like that when it flicks between HDR mode on and off. It's a little quicker than the Gen 1 QD-OLEDs. It's not a huge amount of difference, but it is a little bit quicker still. So now we're just in HDR 1000, peak 1000, which is what I like. And obviously my Windows HDR calibration is for peak 1000 as well. So nothing else needs to be changed. Oh, in terms of brightness, it doesn't really matter what you set your brightness to. I prefer 44 because I've got an i1 Display Pro colorimeter which I measured with. 44 brightness with 66 contrast is about 100 CDM2, which is a standards accepted level of brightness in a normal room environment. And so yeah, that's preferential. So if you like it a bit brighter, crank it up. If you like it a bit dimmer, crank it down. But 44 and 66 correlates to 100 CDM2. So I'll just open that video again, and I'll go into HDR mode by itself. And let's just go back. Yeah, so I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up, but it's a bit more detailed. It's got a bit more highlight detail there than before. So that's content anyway in HDR. And I was using MPC-BE there, but if you can use MPC-HC as well, and that has a auto toggle for HDR. So when you play HDR content locally, it will activate Windows HDR mode, but by default, HDR mode is always off. You don't really want it on Windows because Windows still isn't clever enough like Mac OS is. It will mess up sRGB colors. Some people don't mind that because you can use the SDR slider, when HDR is enabled, to sort of balance out, but it's still not perfect. So I still recommend not using HDR when you're not viewing or playing HDR content. Some games will also trigger Windows HDR, but those that don't, you can use a little utility like Microsoft Auto Runs, which you can tell it to always trigger HDR when that game is executed. So that's a recommendation as well. In terms of performance, I'll open up Nvidia control panel. This does support G-Sync. It is G-Sync compatible, but according to Nvidia's G-Sync page, it doesn't support G-Sync for the full VRR range, so up to 240 Hz from 40 Hz, even though if you turn on the indicator to show G-Sync is active on the top right corner, you will see G-Sync being shown. But apparently there is a future driver coming out to fully support G-Sync VRR capabilities, but it does work with G-Sync above 40 FPS, 40 Hertz anyway. So what differences that will make, I don't know for sure, but yeah, it's just keeping that in mind really. I've got a 4090, so most games run at well over 100 FPS, and I've not seen any issues with lack of G-Sync or anything like that. The indicator's always there on display. So that's that. In terms of color accuracy, I have done a measurement. So this is standard mode, so not creator mode out of the box. So that's when you go down to here preset mode, and you select creator instead of standard, or standard instead of creator. And standard mode is this accurate. So it's, what does that say? 6383K, and the normal calibration target for a hardware colorimeter would be 6500K. So it's close, but not precisely close. Whereas if you put in creator mode, it's 6423. So it's near enough as accurate as you'd want it to be. So this is color accurate out of the box. I could edit my photos, edit videos and things, and know that I'm getting accurate colors. And you can see from the balance there that it's nigh on perfect as well. So nothing needs to be done. I would recommend not installing the Dell software or the Alienware software, because it will install an ICC profile which messes up sRGB colors. For some reason it seems to think that you're viewing wide gamut, so it expands the sRGB range even though you've clamped it on the OSD to sRGB. So don't install the drivers, because the drivers aren't needed for this. It will install an ICC profile which will mess things up and auto update and stuff like that. So avoid that. For gaming, I don't use anything special really. You don't need to do much else extra. So in the Nvidia app, the only things I change are make sure that G-Sync compatible is on for VRR, set the max frame rate to 235 FPS, which is 5 below the refresh rate of 240. This is just for older games that don't play ball properly with VRR or G-Sync. So having a max FPS cap of 235 means it will never overshoot over the refresh rate range and then cause tearing. So it's just for that really. I don't need to do anything else. VSync, you can leave it on or off, but I just leave it on that, and that seems to work fine. You can leave it off as well. I've tried it with both and it seems fine. The Blurbuster's recommendation is to leave VSync on, because when G-Sync is enabled and VSync is on, VSync functions a different way, so you get the best latency versus VSync within the VR range this way. But I'm currently doing some testing with it off, because I've found a few quirks with some software. I don't know if it's display related or driver related, because the Nvidia driver hasn't updated to fully support G-Sync range for this monitor yet. So it's just something I'm testing out, so that's why it's off for the moment. Nothing else needs to be changed, as I said. Low latency and stuff like that, just leave that on default, which is off. In terms of mitigations for burn-in, this is QD-OLED Gen 3, so these are too new to tell how much burn-in there might be over time, but I've had it for a little over a month now and I've not noticed any issues. I do check. I have some specific color swatches and things that I check from time to time which can show burn-in, which it did on the DW when I sent those back for replacement. So it's specifically on grey, so this type of grey, you would see a split, because I tend to have my browser window split somewhere in the middle, and I'd see the line where the burn-in line was, and that's what I do for productivity and stuff. Nothing that I can see that's obvious on the QF after a month, and all of the colours are perfectly fine as well. I am connected by DisplayPort. VRR works fully via HDMI or DisplayPort, so you can use whatever connection you've got based on your GPU. On the underside you have one USB-A and one USB-C. USB-C is not display compatible, so it's not display alt. It is only USB pass-through for connecting drives, devices and charging. So the charging is 15 watts output. So just to keep that in mind, 15 watts via the USB-C, and it's 5 volt 2 amps via the USB-A on there, and you've got two other additional USB-A ports on the backside. So just to keep that in mind. Differences between the AW3225QF, if I just go around the back. I am on an Ergotron MX arm, and the Gen 1 QD-OLEDs, the 34-inch ultra-wides, did come with a bracket on that you just clamp onto the back of the monitor to install your VESA-mounted arm on. Makes things so much easier. The QF, and I don't believe any of the others, they don't come with that bracket anymore, so you have to physically mount your arm onto the back. There is a recess, so it can stay on there if you angle it upwards, so you can do it as one person. You don't need a second pair of hands to sort of mount it or anything like that. And then you just tighten the screws up and it's on there. So that's a little annoying that they don't include the bracket anymore, because that made things a whole lot easier. And you can't use the DF's, the previous gen's bracket on this, because the mounting hole itself, the recess, is narrower than the one on the DW. So it won't work, which is a bit of a shame. So Dell have obviously changed that. Other things I've noticed compared to the DW, the bottom of the monitor, it feels a bit cheaper. So this plastic all along here is much more scratchier than before. The power button feels a little flimsier as well. The panel itself is thinner, so the middle of the display, it's thinner than the DWF, so it does sit a bit further back, and you don't have a bracket as well, so there's probably about an inch saved there as well. So the QF does sit further back than the DWF, the ultra-wides do, from 34-inch. So that's pretty cool. There is more heat that gets pumped out of the top compared to the 34-inch, which was a bit of a surprise. You'd expect a 34 to pump out more heat. There's one less fan than DW on this as well. So the DWs have the G-Sync module, so they have two fans, one for the G-Sync module, one for the panel. But this has one fan and it's virtually inaudible. So if I just turn the desk fan off, do a quick test, and there is a diagnostic you can run in the diagnostics menu. So self-diagnostic, go down to fan test, and there's two levels of fan, L1 and L2. So take a listen. That's level 1 enabled. If I enable level 2, so you can hear that now, and I'll turn it off. So the fan, both levels do come on and off as and when they're needed. So if it does overheat, it will go into level 2, and then it'll go back down to level 1 again, which is virtually inaudible. Just turn the desk fan back on. So yeah, that's the difference. The other thing I've noticed is when the computer is locked, just like the DW, the monitor will go into sleep mode after about 30 seconds. So we'll just wait for that now. I'll fast forward this bit in editing. Okay, so it's gone into standby mode now from the lock screen, and this happens before anyway on the DWF and DW. And what happens is, just like before, the monitor, if a pixel refresh is due or a panel refresh, within a minute of it going to sleep mode or standby mode, it will run that pixel refresh. So again, I'll give it about a minute. I'll fast forward. Okay, so now it's in standby mode from the lock screen, and it took about 15 pulses of white on the power LED to kick into pixel mode, pixel refresh. So a pixel refresh is done every 4 hours. It doesn't prompt you on the QF like it does on the DW and DWF. So it only does it when the monitor enters standby mode, or you manually press the power button and it goes into it straight away. And it takes about 6 to 8 minutes, whereas it took 5 minutes on the Gen 1 and Gen 2 QD-OLEDs. You can obviously still interrupt at any time, and wake up time is actually quicker than the DW and DWF, so which is quite good, and you get this little warning that you interrupted it. So I'll skip it for now and just log in. And to tell if a pixel refresh is due or a panel refresh, you just press anything on the jog dial, and up here you'll get a little window and it tells you panel health. So a yellow means a pixel refresh is due. If that indicator is red, it means a panel refresh is due. So all you've got to do is press the power button and they'll go straight into pixel refresh, or lock your OS, and within a minute or two it will automatically go into a refresh mode anyway. Or if you've got a timeout screensaver to then go to the lock screen, it will do it all by itself when you just walk away from your computer. So there's lots of ways to do that. Mitigating screen burning things, I don't think you need to actually hide your taskbar. I've yet to see a single one where burn-in has happened on someone's DW or DWF, even Gen 1, and then the taskbar is showing where the burn-in is, it tends to only be on strict straight lines which have black. So black is obviously pixels are off. So if you have two windows, for example, I tend to have two browser windows like this, and where that divide is, there is a distinct difference. And because I have a rotating wallpaper, just because that's how I like it, and it's probably best as well, you tend to get, because of windows, you can see there between, the border between is different. So over time, over several months on the Gen 1s, this is how I saw the burn-in, just that line going through it. And you can of course adjust how you have windows and things set up, which is quite good the way Windows can do it. And I just have it specifically for that purpose, and I change it as I need it really. In terms of gaming as well, I'll just fire up a game. Let's use Doom Eternal. You can see what the indicator and things are like then as well. I have got light in the background, so the blacks will look a little off, a little redder, just because of the anti-glare coating. .235 FPS, and if I enable the refresh rate indicator, 240. So G-Sync isn't active in Doom Eternal at the moment. I believe I might have changed some of the settings before. Let's just have a look. Borderless windowed, yeah, so you need to be in full screen. Let's apply that. And now we can see G-Sync in green is displayed there, and the VRR is working. So I think this is what the Nvidia meant by driver support to fully work with VRR in certain modes and resolutions. It doesn't work. I've also found in other games, if you're not in 4K, so if I played the game in 1440p, then G-Sync is not displayed there. It just says normal, indicating G-Sync isn't active, and you can see from the FPS or Hertz counter there that it's not bouncing like it is with VRR. So VRR is not active if you're not in full screen mode or at native res, depending on the game. So you'll need to play around and test. So if I go back to borderless windowed now and retry, and now you can see G-Sync is there. So there is a bit of a oddity going on with certain games, but normally you should be in full screen anyway. Let's just apply that. Although in games like Cyberpunk, so if I just load up Cyberpunk, it doesn't take too long to load. I play that at windowed borderless and have never had an issue with G-Sync not being active. So it does seem to be game or engine specific on whether it works or not, and whether you need to flick over to full screen or not. So immediately you can see their G-Sync indicator is there, and as soon as the game loads, we should see that start to fluctuate. Yep. So if I remember right, I am in full screen borderless, windowed borderless, yeah, and we've got G-Sync there, and we now have activity there as well. So let's just get out of that. In terms of screen flicker or VRR flicker, there still is VRR flicker on this. You can't really avoid it, to be honest with you. It's an OLED thing, and I think some mini LEDs and IPS panels do have it when VRR is enabled as well. So I'm just going to turn off the frame rate thing. Yeah, so that's another quirk. If you enable the frame rate indicator via a shortcut, which I have there, so for example, yeah, and if I go back into it and click on it, you would think this would disable it. So it does go off during the menu, but it comes back. The only way to turn it back off is to actually go into the game enhanced mode menu and then turn it off there. So that's a bug. I believe I have got the 34-inch ultra-wide downstairs. It's not on at the moment, but I believe that has the same bug as well, so Dell haven't really fixed that. So yeah, there is that to keep in mind too. In terms of other things, there's no other issues with it really. The monitor the fan is completely silent. Performance is amazing. 240 Hz versus 175, you can definitely tell, even in Windows. So for example, let's just open a window there. Just dragging windows around, it visibly feels much quicker, and the cursor on a 1000 Hz mouse, so the cursor itself feels quicker as well, and visibly you can tell it's much more instant than 175 Hz. So even in desktop environment without gaming, there is a difference. Going from 120 Hz to 144 Hz to 175 on the 34-inch, you can't tell the difference in moving stuff around, cursor and so on. So that was interesting to experience. Whether it's because the panel's different, or whether it's because we've now got a much higher resolution, 4K, with a high pixel density, I don't know. But either way, 240 Hz is definitely noticeable. The other thing is, 10-bit color isn't enabled by default. You do need to go into your display driver. So I'll just go into Nvidia control panel. And if I remember right, it's under change resolution. Yeah, so here it's at 8-bit by default. And most of my editing is done with raw files which are 12-bit, so getting the most out of it will be beneficial by setting it to 10-bit. HDR content is 10-bit anyway, because that's where the extra HDR content color information is stored. But if you're on an Nvidia card, then 8-bit plus FRC, which is what Nvidia cards use, is virtually indistinguishable from 10-bit native, so it doesn't really matter which you use. But these panels, the 4K panels, support 10-bit through 240 Hz native refresh rate anyway, whereas on the AW3225QF and DWF, you only had 10-bit native support if you drop the refresh rate to 144 Hz. So it's worth checking this and flicking at 10-bit anyway, because you're not losing anything by doing so. So unless you're on a specific GPU that only works in 8-bit, for example, then stick to 10-bit. So just check this because it's not at 10-bit by default. And that is basically it. I've had no issues at all with the monitor. In terms of creaking plastics and things like that, that is exactly the same. If you do pinch in some of the edges and sides, you do get some plastic creaking, but that happens on the old monitors anyway. This bar here with the branding, that still is metal. So if so the magnet does stick to it. So that's still metal. There is a soundbar magnets on the bottom still as well. So you've got two. If you buy the Dell soundbar, I don't know which ones are compatible with this one, but they've got magnets where you can attach them to as well, which is probably useful if you're connecting a console to it, because you can use HDMI ARC through one of the 2.1 ports on the back. In the dark, let's just flick the lights off. Pitch black is pitch black, which is really nice to see. So let's just flick through my color wheel. Maximize. So yeah, everything's really good on it. I've had no issues whatsoever. Performance is great. I don't really miss not having ultra wide at my desk anymore, mainly because all the benefits of QD-OLED are still here, and I'm actually enjoying the extra height now. So it's 1440 pixels of the ultra wide versus 2160, and you can definitely feel visibly the difference. It's not that much narrower in width, so you still get the full content view watching 16:9 content, which, let's be honest, unless you're watching a movie, whatever you view online, YouTube and stream sites and so on, is going to be 16:9 98% of the time. So you get a better view of general content on this than you do on the ultra wide. Otherwise you end up with letterboxes or pillar boxes on either side with a shorter view, so you end up with a smaller 16:9 view than you would on a 32-inch 16:9 with 4K. The only time that will change is when 39 or 40-inch ultrawides come out next year, and they will be 5120 by 2160. So they'll be coming out to probably about there on my desk. So I will be getting one of those because that will be the end game for me, really. So it'll be similar kind of height to the 32-inch, but with all the width of an ultrawide. So this, for me, at the moment, maybe a year of stepping stone into getting the 4K ultrawides or waiting for them to come out. So it's given me a good experience on seeing what these are like, and I really like it. I'm not going to go back to 34-inch ultrawide, and you can definitely tell the difference at 240Hz, and games at 4K are now running and looking better than what I was running with DLDSR on the ultrawide. So I was using DLDSR before to render at 5160 by 2160, and that had a performance overhead as well because the GPU driver, the Nvidia driver, has to do a lot of work. Whereas now I can run native 4K with DLSS performance, and that generates a 1080p internal render, but the output image is actually higher quality and cleaner than DLDSR at 5160 by 2160 on the ultrawide. So it's just worth keeping that in mind, and the performance is better as well because there's none of the overhead since you're outputting without having that driver overhead of DLDSR. So it's just worth keeping that in mind. So highlights, the 10-bit color is not on by default, so to check that. Windows HDR, create the calibration profile using the HDR tool from Microsoft. Use creator mode in sRGB if you intend to view color accurate work, or if you care about accurate colors, because everything you view online will be sRGB anyway, so it kind of makes sense to do that. But if you use standard mode, the colors are a bit punchier on red, green and blue, so some people prefer that. You can use standard mode. In HDR mode, this is ignored because the HDR content is taking over brightness and colors, so this is only for sRGB really. So for my own preferences, it's creator mode always in sRGB, and then the brightness you can set to whatever you want because that doesn't affect color accuracy, it's just personal preference. So as I said, 44 brightness, 66 contrast correlates to 100 CDM2, which is an standards accepted level of brightness. The standards level range is between 90 CD and 120 CD, and this is just smack in the middle, which is exactly what I like. And other than that, that's it really. Really good monitor.